We talked with Matt Forsyth and Therese Lewis, the creative team of Hexapus Ink. Matt is an artist, creator, and writer, and Therese is the writer, creator, and business manager. Together, they create the graphic novel Bound. Not only do they talk about working together and building a Lovecraftian cyberpunk universe, they also have some great tips and advice on how to make your comic into a business, keep a schedule, and make an immersive story and stay connected to your fans while being stuck at home. I had a really great time talking to them, and I'm sure you're going to have a great time listening to this conversation. All right, we're ready to go. We're ready to roll now. All right. So this is I counted it. This is episode 13 of Storycomic Presents. So we have, this is good. So we have here with us that Matt Forsyth and Therese Lewis, who are the creative team of Hexapus Ink, which has one of their standout titles is Bound, and it's one of the more successful storylines and one of the more successful projects that I know that I've been following on Patreon, and also one of the more successful programs books that we've seen also in the comic book conventions. You guys done a lot of very good successful cons, and this is con season, but unfortunately things are a little slow now with the times as we're living in historical times right now.
Yeah, for sure. Strange times.
So go, if you guys want to first kind of introduce yourselves and then talk a little bit about and then kind of give us a little bit of a background on Bound. And as I said, you have 3 issues out so far, and you're working on the 4th one. And I'm all read up to all 3, so I do have questions, and I want to try to make sure they're spoiler free in case of the people that want to for those that are going to start reading after this. So without further ado, I just want to hand over the reins to Matt and Therese. So go for it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that awesome introduction. I appreciate it. Makes us sound like a big deal, for sure. My friend and I grew up reading comics in the Midwest, in Michigan, and I was always an aspiring artist and I knew I wanted to be an artist since I was a kid, and got into comic books and drawing comic books in high school, and then went off and did other things, tried other art forms, but eventually came back to comics, and all my comic book drawing knowledge is self-taught, but my art knowledge is not. I went to art school, and I took private art lessons when I was like in 3rd or 4th grade with my brother, and taking art classes throughout my public school time, and continued through college to take art focused classes. And I always knew I wanted to be an artist. In my 20s, I didn't know I wanted to be a comic book artist. Like I was trying other things, and I tried all sorts of different art forms. But like I said, eventually came back to comics and started working on Bound. The original creation of Bound was like I said, my friend and I, Kevin Lill, thought we'd just give it a shot. After college, we both found ourselves in our hometown and didn't really know what we were going to do with our lives. And we started going back and forth with some ideas, and Bound wasn't even called Bound. We didn't really have a proper title for it, but we had an idea, and we were giving it a shot for a little while, and our lives went in different directions, and I came back to it, but Kevin had, he started a family, and he had bigger and better things to worry about. And he gave me his blessing, and I asked Therese if she would like to write the script for the first issue, as she was a aspiring sci-fi writer.
Yep.
And she agreed, and it worked out really well, and we've been doing it ever since. It's been a very long journey. We didn't just like put out an issue and then the next month put out another issue. It took us like 10 years to put out 3 issues. So it's been like I always tell people it wasn't by any industry standards, it wasn't acceptable by any means. But we kept going with it, and I think now we're in a pretty good place with it, where we're releasing it quarterly, and we're kind of chugging along, and it's progressing at its own regular pace, instead of starts and stops and moving and changing careers and all the things of life, all the twists and turns in life. But we've stuck with it throughout all that stuff.
So you talked about, so give us a little bit of background for those that are watching or listening to a quick synopsis of what the story of Bound is. You have it set up now as a 12. You have it. You've said it there on your website. It's 12 issues. You're working on issue 4 now. So what's the synopsis? Not the synopsis, but what's the story of Bound?
Yeah, I like to call it a post-apocalyptic ghost story. At its core, it's about Natalia Kane. She falls victim to a demon, Seth, who he feeds on her. He feeds on like the innocence of people, and when he feeds on her, they become bound together, and the bond between them is so strong that he can't just feed on her and leave. And she actually sees him, which usually doesn't happen. So she has to spend 12 issues trying to figure out what's going on. Is she crazy? Is this all happening in her head? And how is she gonna break the bond between them and rid herself of this curse? But it all takes place in post-apocalyptic world, world, like final war. We call it the final war, where it just knocks out the majority of the world's population. And as far as Natalia knows, there's nothing outside the city. The city's been like built up after 140 years, and it's kind of like a little oasis in the middle of the wastelands. But as far as she knows, there's nothing else out there, as far as she knows.
Right. But you both know what's out there.
Yeah,
for sure. Rough idea.
and the way, so Therese, what is, as the writer of it now, when you stepped in, how much of the meta plot has the Therese Lewis hands involved in it, and how much of that is from the basic outline and premise that Matt came to you with?
I think Matt had a lot of the overarching story for it. So a lot of the big classic story arcs in there. And you'll see, as I've gotten more involved with it, as I've done more writing, and as we've gotten a lot more in sync with the world, you'll see there's going to be a lot more intricacies in the writing, a lot more nuance to it. I think the first issue is definitely a little simpler, a little more straightforward in how it's told. And issue 3 really was the first issue that I think we storyboarded together more. Almost all of the story started in his head. So I came to comic writing a little backwards. Instead of me writing something and having him draw it, he already knew what was happening. And I had to give it a voice and help it kind of find my voice while doing that. And I think by issue 3 was the first thing I really drafted a lot of things, and very little of it got redlined. So, because I kind of know that, like, you have to have one person in charge of a project, or else you're going to lose focus and it's not going to develop well. So I know that final say, this guy right here for this particular story, and that's absolutely fine. So I'll draft things and send them to him, and he can scratch everything off. So I know not to be, too attached to what I do. But as we're going, we're definitely getting more you're going to see a lot more influence of the story arches themselves are going to get more layers to them. And that's my influence, but it's not just me. There a lot of the times, we'll be going along. It's like, I don't know how we're going to get, this guy over here. And then that's where I can come in and be like, oh, well, he just takes this route and then it makes sense and it flows and stuff like that. So a lot of it's that too, I think, if he's thinking of a story and gets stuck partway on that path, it's really easy to get unstuck when you have someone else who knows the world, knows the characters, and can step in. And it's the same thing. If I get an idea for something, it might not fit here, but we've got other projects we're going to do in the future too. So you'll see more and more stuff, I think. I think the writing's I've really found my voice a lot. So by issue 3, it really started to sound like me. And I think you're going to see a more cohesive voice in the future issues. And then in the actual storylines too, you will see a lot more connectivity between scenes and just a better flow, I think. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Therese, what's your inspirations? What other type of writers that you've kind of been inspired to as you've worked on this story that through this world that Matt created?
Yeah, so I've written since I remember doing Little Fruit comic strips back when I was like 10 years old. And I've always written stories. I remember the first journal I was ever given. I remember the first story I handed in that got edited in a way I did not like, where teachers were like changing words. And I'm like, that's okay. And I've always written and I've always struggled with kind of finding the overall story arc. And I like exploring characters. The characterization is really one of my strengths. Giving people voices that's probably what I'm the best at. And when I started working on Bound, I started realizing that, all the stuff I struggle with is the stuff he's drawing. So now the struggle's gone. A lot of my influence, a lot of sci-fi influence grew up on, original Star Trek and Next Gen, because they're the best ones. And also though, like,
gonna get some haters out there.
Yeah. Okay. Not the best ones. They're my favorite ones. That's how I should phrase that. I also should preface that with I am not as visual, so I don't watch a lot of TV and movies. So more of my influence of reading a lot of Asimov, William Gibson, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, a lot of that stuff, but also a lot of other, I read a lot. And a lot of what I read is a lot of sci-fi, but also a lot of romance novels, which sounds silly, but a romance novel is a very straight storyline. So for writing, it's very easy to pick out and find, your beginning, middle, and end, what you're promising at the beginning. Are you delivering on it? And it can help you really learn how to get a good ending that's satisfactory. That being said, there is no romance in Bound. That's just one of my influences, and I'm not ashamed of it. Some people are like, oh, just like people who read comic books, like, well, I don't want to tell them I read comic books. No one thinks that. No, it's all valid art. It doesn't matter. So I'm not ashamed of that. But a lot of my writing influence comes from a lot of some of the harder sci-fi. Rudy Rucker is another one that not a lot of people have read, but amazing stories from like the 70s, I think. And Philip K. Dick is another one I've read a lot of. So that's where a lot of my influence comes from. And definitely, I do like the hard science in science fiction. So I definitely love when something comes up and Matt's like, can you research that? I need to like draw a science thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll look into it. And a lot of the science and stuff behind, like Matt said, stuff feeds on innocence. I have a whole theory of how that scientifically works. And you're probably never going to make it into the story because it doesn't need to, but it's there.
Right.
There if we need it.
So when I read through Bound, it reminded me a lot of, it almost felt like Lovecraftian cyberpunk in a way.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's that's awesome. Yeah, that's basically what we're going for.
And I actually hadn't read Lovecraft until we started working on this, and Matt connected me with some short stories. But I did read, like I said, William Gibson, and like a lot of and Philip K. Dick, a lot of his stories.
And also too, that from the visual perspective, Matt, and I remember when I asked you when we did our pre-interview yesterday about some of the font style you put in some like Asian influence involved in the scenery. Talk to us a little bit about that inspiration for you to put that into the style of this dystopian future cyberpunk cyberpunk Lovecraftian world.
Yeah, I think most of that comes from manga and anime. Um, I I started watching anime when it was first blowing up in the U.S. when Akira came over here, and the Guyver and a bunch of other. There was a plethora of science fiction horror anime being thrown at teenage boys in the 90s, and I couldn't get enough of it. I still can't. I'm loving the internet right now because everyone's uploading all these old anime OVAs that no one remembers or cares about, and I'm watching them all the time, and all the stuff I couldn't find at like Blockbuster Video or whatever. But yeah, I loved all that stuff, and as I got older, and I started reading manga, I started to realize that a lot of manga is one person and their team, and it's an overall vision, and they sometimes finish it and it's over and it's just one story, and that's it, and it doesn't go on for 50 years. Like nothing against Spider-Man. I love reading Spider-Man, the X-Men, and all that stuff, but I like the idea that someone could create something and it would exist. They were the creator, they were the vision, sometimes they were the artist, the writer, the everything, and they created it, and that's it. It didn't become like this huge franchise and like, passing back and forth between hands, and different writers come around and reboot it and change the history. And like, I love the idea that someone could just create something and it'd be this singular. It's like a novel, It's like we don't. I mean, I'm sure it happens, but there's no one's going to go out there and be like, oh, I just rebooted Stephen King's It. I rewrote the whole thing, like changed all the characters. They're all different. And we're going to sell it. Like that would be preposterous, right? But in comic books, that's the way it goes, at least in the US. We got Spider-Man, but I'm going to completely change his history. And now he's like younger and he wears a different suit. And I got kind of, I guess, frustrated with that stuff a little bit. So manga was like a breath of fresh air. And then I found out that the pages were flipped when they brought them over here. Because when we got manga, this is bound, but in the 90s when you got manga, it was this size. It was like an issue because they didn't think we could handle like the whatever format it came out in Japan. So it was always like issues. So they flipped it, and then they changed the sound effects to English, which to me is like another step in altering the artwork. So I was kind of like, it was kind of like my response to that. I was like, well, if they're just going to take out katakana, which is the phonetic onomatopoeia of like crumble and crash and all that stuff, I'm going to use katakana because it looks cool. And I'm not a letterer, so I thought it was a good way to make it kind of stylistic. And it was also my kind of jab at the industry a little bit. Because I wanted to see, like, I love Akira. Akira is one of my biggest influences, and I have the Dark Horse versions where they changed the sound effects to English. And I think if you get the Kodansha releases, it's the original with all the katakana in there.
Right. And
to me, that's like a little bit like that's like a little bit over the line of like, I'm gonna alter this artwork just to kind of appease people that, it's kind of like not giving us credit to figure out what this sound effect is. I think it was a little presumptuous that people wouldn't be able to handle. And now you get manga and I don't think they do that much anymore. Yeah. They change the sound effects, but at the time I thought that was kind of outrageous. And I was younger, of course, and a little bit more spirited, so. But yeah, going back to my influences, Ghost in the Shell was a huge one. When I actually, after seeing the animated film from the 90s and reading the manga, and it was just one single book, and I loved Masamune Shirow's artwork, and it seemed very complex yet simple at the same time. And the black and white, like he had a few color pages and then the rest was black and white. And for some reason, just black and white really struck me. Like, it really hit me in the gut, spoke to my soul. So that was always my like vision, was to make something on that level as far as artistically, and then use those inspirations as my supposed style, even though I don't know. Some might argue I don't have a style, but
So part of, and when we talked about the sound effects that we put in, and the other part too that I think that the two of you are really successful on in your stories is that is the level of immersion that that you're able to put the readers in. One of them is, for instance, is certain terms you use. One thing that stuck out for me that I found delightful and reminded me of the fact too is that with as I said, with the sound effects that you put in. But I remember also talking to some of my friends overseas who say animals say different things. Like you ask somebody from France, what does a rooster say? They say it says cuckoo or something like that.
Yeah.
And I noticed that you said in there you have the cat saying not meow, it's saying
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, new and yeah. Those are that's what cats say in Japan.
No, okay. And so there is a sense that this it's not a singular culture that in this city is made up of. And you also used a term in there too, is that I wrote it down. It's one of the page 19. Now I'm giving you page 19. You use the word like it's in a different quadrant. You didn't say like a different part of the city or quadrant. So when you were writing this, maybe this could it's a question for either of you, I guess, is that did you before as you're writing it, do you have like a lexicon or like a glossary thing? All right, this is what this city, this is what they refer to this or that or this. Did you, as somebody who's listening to this who is looking to write something along these lines, like doing this world building exercise, what were those steps that you did to create this immersion for your readers?
Yeah, that's a awesome question. I, like Therese was saying, she mentioned some old stuff. I have some weird, there's some overlap with our influences, and I have some probably unexpected influences. I really like Dickens, and I like George Orwell, and I really like old Star Trek and old Twilight Zones and Outer Limits and stuff that people, I can't imagine a 12-year-old kid now watching a random episode of the Twilight Zone and being, maybe they would. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit because I loved them, and it was way beyond my time too. So, I kind of think of my influences more of I like the timeless dialogue. I like things like, in my opinion, you could take any of the almost any of the episodes of the original Star Trek, not change a single word of dialogue, and reshoot it with different actors with modern special effects, and it would work just fine today. Most of them.
Yeah.
There's some sillier episodes, but the good ones anyways. And I love that. And the same as with A Christmas Carol, like how many times has that movie been remade? And they don't really change it very much each time, because it's so timeless. There's nothing.
It's always a piece of cheese that gives him bad dreams.
So one of the things that I'm kind of like very strict on is keeping, I don't want to say things that make it sound contemporary, and I don't want to say things that make it identifiable with one particular region. Where I want people to be able to imagine it as their city, instead of it being like, oh, that's San Francisco, or that was in the 90s in San Francisco because they said radical or something, you know, like I'm very conscious of that stuff, and I avoid that stuff like the plague, because it just basically it comes down to our sensibilities and what we like out of all these things, and what we've sat down and like discussed of what we liked or didn't like about certain shows or books or whatever. And one of the things that always, you know, nothing against it, but when I'm reading some modern comics, something that always brings me out of it is like, I don't know what like if someone wrote a comic today and started mentioning the pandemic or something, it would immediately bring me out of it and bring me back to our current times.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's out of line to say that comic books are an escape, or that novels are an escape, or watching TV shows are an escape. So I like to, it's kind of a contradiction. I like to have some heavy social commentary, some heavier themes, some bigger questions involved, but I also like it to be its own timeless thing. So like, I don't want to be hit over the head with a message, but I also don't want to be thinking about the current president. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
So what is it then? I guess, so, because Matt, you bring something to the table. Therese, you bring something to the table. When you decided to formalize this working relationship, did the two of you kind of sit down and talk about, these are your non-negotiables? Like, this is something that I want to make sure stays pure in this world. And then what parts did, Therese, did you say, this needs to, in order for this to happen, these pieces have to be put in place as well?
I think, well, like I said before, Matt is the lead on this project.
Yeah.
This has existed in his head for a very long time. I am bringing words to that. I am giving something that already exists words. Mm-hmm. He's the only one who really knows how. I mean, now we both do, but especially initially, he's the one who knows the world. So I'm not going to know if they're the right words or not. So we did very early on kind of set some boundaries about, you know, I will try writing for it. I've struggled finishing projects in the past, so I might not be a good fit. I might not be able to get the tone that we need. I don't write. This is the first project I've really worked on where I've written such heavy topics. Because I definitely, you know, original Star Trek's little lighthearted, a lot of it. So, I mean, covered some things, but very lighthearted writing. I'm a very lighthearted, positive person. Can't help that. So I knew that might be a struggle or a challenge for me. And it really came down to, if it didn't work, if it was going to compromise any part of this world that already exists, then it's not going to happen. And so we definitely had to, it was a little hard at first. You know, I had to learn that I can write this. I can think it's the most beautiful, poetic, amazing piece of writing. But if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. The example I give a lot is, you know, I can write this wonderful story about Natalia stopping at the grocery store and buying green beans, and it's perfect and it's her life and it really happened. We don't need to know in this story that she had green beans for dinner. And so that's my example of, like, you know, like I've got to write it, but it's got to fit the story. As we've gone on more and more, you know, I draft things and I don't get too attached and I wait to see what gets slashed and what gets circled and what are we keeping, what are we losing, and less stuff gets scrapped now. And like you were saying too, our lexicon and the words that we use, there are some times where I can't think of the right word, but I know the one I have isn't right. So he'll get notes that'll be something like word circled of like, not this word. And then he'll come back. He's like, we should use this word. And I'm like, yes, that's the one. I couldn't think of it. It's easier than using a thesaurus sometimes.
There are certain, I think in issue 2, I insisted on using the word vaporized. Which is, I think Therese thought it was too old school or not quite right.
It just didn't, it wasn't doing it for me, but it works now.
I liked it because it sounded old. It sounded like classic, like you'd hear it in like, you know, Forbidden Planet or something. Those are just little things like that, where you could definitely use some sort of more modern sounding dialogue for a lot of it, especially the sci-fi stuff. And I like to make it sound old and like antique kind of, which is kind of strange, but,
but you know, whatever.
Well, it's almost like how like Tim Burton always makes sure that his movies feel timeless, where you'd have a flashbulb camera, but then you'd have like a, you know, like electronic, you know, like there's things that he puts in place that seems to, you can't pinpoint a specific time for that. And that was the other thing that I loved about how you set it up, is like some sci-fi or, you know, post-apocalyptic will always say, you know, the year 2000. And but was that deliberate for you to say 150 years after the final war, so that it was hard, you couldn't say
I think it's hard to predict what, like, a lot of people have their predictions, you know, end of the world and all that stuff, and I think it's hard to know. If you're a real pessimist, you know, you could be like, well, you know, humans are on their way out, but I mean, we could be around for another 5,000 years, you know, like our society in some form or another, you know, it doesn't have to end up in post-apocalyptic, you know, thermonuclear war. You know, it doesn't have to be that way, but so it's kind of hard to like say that, oh, you know, in the next 200 years people are going to be dead, you know, and we're all going to be like Mad Max. And I didn't want to like pin it down and say that. And, you know, like, I don't know if, I know in Blade Runner they say it was, you know, 2019 or whatever,
right?
I don't know if Philip K. Dick said it was. I think he might have said it was in the 80s. I'm
trying to remember now.
If you read the Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, it's quite different, but I don't remember if he,
I don't think he would. I feel like,
but in the intro, in the opening crawl of Blade Runner, you have the November 2019.
Yeah. I think it also, the way it's phrased also kind of has that a more universal perception. Right. You may live in a culture that doesn't use the same calendar. Maybe your year isn't even 365 days.
Right.
There's not a lot of calendars like that anymore, but I'd studied some archaeology and anthropology in the past too. So like there have been calendars that aren't the same kind of calendar. So I kind of like that it isn't a year, because what if that's not the calendar that's still being used anyway? Like that could be meaningless.
Well, the Ethiopian calendar is still different. They still go.
Yeah, I know there's a few other calendars around the world that are a little different. Like they're, you know, we may not get a lot of people from Ethiopia reading this, but we could. Right. I've known people from Ethiopia. Like that's a thing that could happen. I gave a copy to someone I know who's from Bali in Indonesia. So it's one of the things we wanted it to be. You know, if we've had people from other countries actually order it. And it's kind of always that little touch of like, oh my gosh, like someone was able to identify this who didn't grow up here. And that feels really good. And I feel like that's just one more level of it, of, you know, keeping that universal human feel versus this is for people from this specific background. And you're the only ones who are going to get all the inside jokes.
Which is fine. I mean, nothing against like
that's not what we're going for. Like,
right. Yeah, but as I said, as we were talking earlier, there is a sense of this multicultural feel that like you said, you can't really pinpoint it on a certain time or a certain culture, and I think that gives it that universal readability for a lot of people. And as I say, it's great for people who love horror. It's great for people who love science fiction. It fits in that sense. Now, so talk to us a bit about the. So one of the successes that Hexapus Ink has is that you're a team. So a lot of the people we talk to are independent creators, kind of have to wear all hats. Mm-hmm. So. And it's, you know, you compare it to either. So what is it? So talk briefly about as well, because Therese, you're listed as the business manager of Hexapus Ink. What does that role entail, and how grateful is Matt not having to do that type of work?
He still does a surprising amount of it.
Okay.
There are certain things that will never be my strengths, like social media and stuff. So in that respect, my business plan for the social media is to let Matt do it.
Okay.
That's about as involved as I get. I do a lot of the financials and things there, setting budgets, setting goals. We're right now restructuring our plan for this year, the overall business plan with our strategic plan, because our original strategic plan for the year included a lot of conventions that are getting canceled, that may get canceled, that may not get canceled. What are they going to look like if they don't get canceled? Who knows? So we're doing some restructuring there. Some of the things we had planned on rolling out this year, we're changing how we're doing that. We've already rolled out the new tiers for Patreon. We're going to start doing more with Patreon right now and promoting that instead of promoting conventions. So we're not able to do that. And if you do subscribe to our Patreon, you do get things in the mail. So you can get some of the same exact things you could buy at a convention, but we'll just send it right to your doorstep as part of your tier. So we're kind of taking that step back, looking at the whole thing. How can we make this profitable? How can we turn this into a career so that, you know, I don't have to work a separate job, so that we can both be doing this full time all the time. So that's really fun. I like it. I have so many spreadsheets. I have spreadsheets for every supply we need to order. We've done a lot of reevaluating, you know, what are we doing that we can outsource? What are we doing that we should definitely be the ones in charge of? So we're, you know, we used to do all of our own prints. We have a good printer, got all my refillable inks and that whole system, but there are some things that we're now sending out to printers to get done. And I don't know. I don't remember if I even answered your question. I really like doing it. And I don't even know what it means, because it just means that I handle all of that, most of that busy work.
Shout out to Googleplex Collectibles,
Yep.
Who do an amazing job with the prints that we sell now. But yeah, like she was saying, she handles a lot of the business end of it, where when we're working conventions, she's keeping track of how much we're selling, how much we, you know, how many prints we have left, how many books we have left, how many, like if we're doing a 3-day con, she does it every single day. It's like, I think if I was doing it on my own and trying to figure it out on my own, I'd probably be like, well, I'll just wait Sunday night, I'll count everything and then figure it all out. But she does every day. She balances the till and like, so it handles it like a real operation, which it is.
It is.
So I would totally be like, just throw it in the bag.
I do keep tallies of like which prints are selling, which ones, especially when we were printing them ourselves, we could go home and print more if we needed. Making notes of feedback. So like when conventions, you know, January, February comes, we don't really do conventions. We get ready to do our taxes. And then I start looking at, you know, what are we going to do for prints this year? What do we have? What do we need to order? What sold last year? New prints that are coming out, how I try to anticipate how they're going to sell so we can have a good inventory. You don't want too much, but you definitely want enough. And books and stuff, when we get, every now and then we'll get books that are misprints. What are we going to do with those? And sometimes we give them away. Sometimes we do discounts on them. And it just kind of depends on everything. Yeah, I do a lot, don't I?
She also is really good at interacting with people at conventions. Whereas I'm not as sociable, so I'd rather just be sitting there drawing. But I mean, she deserves most of the credit for this, almost all of our sales, because she gets it down. She has the tagline down, and she gives them our spiel. And
he also tries to give things away for free more often than he should. I'll bargain with people and he'll be drawing and not hear anything, and then he'll look up and he's like, oh, you can just give it to him. And I'm like, I practically did. Stop that.
So where do you get, like, for like the research perspective, like when you said you redid your tiers, is that something that you kind of did some research on to look at what other folks that do similar work on Patreon do, as to saying, hey, this is something that we've seen pretty successful in the past?
Yeah, he did the research side on Patreon, because he's the one who's, like I said, social media and that kind of stuff is definitely more his vein. I did the mathematical side and the background of like, what have we been doing? What has it been costing us? Is that going to balance out? Can we restructure it so that it's a better balance? Because we definitely would, I feel like we wouldn't mail things out to some of our higher tiers as often as we wanted. And then when we would do it, we would feel kind of guilty. So we'd put a lot more stuff into it. And then the shipping would cost way more because now it's a package. And so just restructuring and finding ways to.
And I don't know how much stuff people want. Like especially now, I'm making, print worthy artwork quite regularly. And, I don't know if people want this all cluttering up their house, like getting big packages and, what am I going to do with all this stuff? So yeah, we basically regrouped, and I looked at a bunch of different Patreon pages, and I mean, that's basically what I've been doing for decades anyways, when it comes to art. When I first started drawing comics, or aspiring to draw comics, I would look at, the cover of the Punisher number 25 or whatever, and try to like recreate that, and learn from what that artist did and try to mimic their techniques. And so I've just applied that same idea where what have these other people done, and how can I take what they've done and take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and make it my own thing, and come up with like a cohesive look for things. And I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
We just updated our Patreon like last week, so I think things are, after 3 years of running a Patreon page, I think we're finally have it to where like this is how I kind of imagined it to begin with, and it's taken me this long to kind of get it all together. There's always so many things that you don't count on when you start something. Doesn't matter what it is. When you when you're saying, I'm going to undertake this, and things go in weird directions.
It's just like when we started doing conventions.
Yeah.
Definitely our first few conventions, the pendulum was swinging between no fan art, too much fan art. Where do we, how do we settle into us? And we've learned a lot over the years. But yeah, Patreon is definitely one of the ones that we've kind of started to see what's right for us, what's a good fit for us.
And
I got to make spreadsheets. So
I wanted to actually offer something of value too, where it wasn't just like, you're supporting what we do. Like there are people out there that will just be like, well, here's the money. What do you need? Just do it, and
those people can go to our Patreon page.
We'd love to have those people.
Subscribe any day.
Most people want to get something in return, so I think the way we have it structured now is that I think for the amount of money that people are paying a year, they're definitely getting what they're paying for.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a supporter for you guys for probably a little over a year or so, and I love, and I think the part of it too, I think, and this is something just from a graphic design perspective, is the consistency and color and tone is pretty thematic. If somebody goes to your both even your website and your Patreon page, it's the black, white, and red, and that's what you guys even have it set up here where you're wearing your t-shirts to kind of match. And it also, I love how you actually have there on your tiers that you actually have part of it is that early access videos and of pages, and you actually have VHS tape on there. It's kind of like that simulation we're talking about, of like that timeless feel to it as well. So so talk a little bit about also Matt, for those that are listening that want to learn more about your style. What's your process? When you sit down with the paper, when you got to start drawing out, page 5 or page 8, start us from the beginning. What do you start with?
Well, first I storyboard the whole issue. And you show me the next one.
Yeah, we don't want to show you that one.
No, that's fine. It wasn't good. So I don't know how well you can see this. There's people probably can't read it, but these are all just like really rough.
Okay.
Really, like these are much cleaner than what I did originally. but they're really sloppy. We know what's going on.
Yeah.
But originally, when I did thumbnail sketches like this, only I could tell what was going on.
Yeah.
And even sometimes they'd be like, what was I doing?
He used to either do like 4 lines, and I could half the time figure it out, or he would draw a full page little mini. Was the other side of it, is he would draw like these super detailed little thumbnails that were definitely more than thumbnails.
So yeah, from that, I think it's important. I think it's an important part of the process that I'm sure some people can skip, no problem. But I think the initial sketches initial just quick, not even when you don't worry about anything and you're just relaxed and you're just like, whatever, I'm just putting this down. And I think that's where some of the magic happens. When you're not so focused on lines and thinking, oh, it's got to be super clean right here. And I think a lot of times when I'm drawing, the final drawing won't have the same life as that initial rough sketch. It's kind of weird. So I guess oftentimes I'll go back and be like, well, why did it work better when I really rough sketched it, and then try to like find a medium between the two. But after I do that, I don't have an example. Well, yeah.
Got some show and tell.
I used to lay it all out in blue, non-photo blue pencil, which was like a old school way of, some people still do that. I don't do it as much anymore, but you can kind of see, I don't know how well you can see the blue shining through there, but I lay it all out in not like very light coal erase non-photo blue Prismacolors, and then go back through with a mechanical pencil, which is usually 2H, and shade it all, and then with a darker like HB outline, add some like outlines to it. This is from issue 4 actually. This is how I did everything before the current way of doing things, whereas now I'm doing most things digitally. I love graphite, and I feel like I got pretty good with pencils to where they were pretty clean, and I love the look of graphite. But realistically, with the amount of time it takes me, I kind of had to ditch that part of the process, which is kind of makes me sad. But at the same time, we have to get this book done, and we basically have like 2 years from now to finish it. So like, if we're gonna stay on the quarterly schedule, some things have to be some things have to be sped up.
So you draw it out, and then what do you scan it, then ink it inside of Photoshop, or?
I'm using Clip Studio Paint. Originally, okay. I was using Photoshop before I knew what I was doing. I had an old Wacom Intuos 3, which was not a screen that you could draw on like most people have now. And I only recently, in the last year and a half or so, I've been able to actually got a tablet that you can draw directly on the screen, and it, there's no like eye-hand coordination as much. And but my plan was always to learn how to ink properly, like traditionally, and I think I've come a long way. And for issue 4, I'm going to be inking a lot traditionally.
Oh wow!
I'm doing like the opposite now, where I'm laying it all out digitally, printing it on Bristol board, and then I'm gonna ink it.
Whoa,
without any graphite, unfortunately. Even though I love pencils, I have to cut that part out, as I said, for speed. But I think once I got over the fear of ink, I started to get a bit better with it. This is real ink here.
Wow. So would you be able to, so I guess the other question from a business perspective, do you ever sell your originals?
I do, yeah, and I have in rare occasions. Some of them, like, this was one of the first pages I did where this was a redraw from issue 1.
Right.
See, and Sorry, it got a little darker.
Yeah.
And this is like one of the first times I was like, I think I kind of know what I'm doing. So as much as I don't want to sell it, I would definitely sell any of them that people would want to buy.
Yeah.
The way things kind of tend to work out now is that I'm doing like a combination of traditional and digital, and sometimes that leaves me without a page that I could sell, but that's kind of secondary to me.
Right.
Because although it's really cool to have like originally hand inked page.
Our dog is over here, so hearing strange noises.
She likes to like grunt and make stretching noises. Surprised she hasn't been snoring. But yeah, I mean, I see the advantage, and I kind of see people's perspective when there's a lot of artists that are like strictly like traditional, like they don't like one of the people who's a great influence on me and is one of the people I look up to the most is the creator of Akira, Katsuhiro Otomo.
Mm-hmm.
He said something in an interview recently, and I was like, something along the lines of he didn't see the point in drawing digitally, which kind of broke my heart. But at the same time, I know he used computers in some of his movies, so you gotta do what you gotta do. I get the idea though that you want like this physical, like one of a kind creation, but when it comes to, I'm more by any means necessary. So when it comes to creating bound, I just need to get it down and get it in the book. So whatever I have to do, ideally if I have something I can sell afterwards, like on its own, that's fine. But
so we're going to learn more, as you said. This is all going to be, as you said, pretty much wrapped up in what, 2 years? You said,
yeah.
So what is next for? Do you have what's this world called? Is it called the Boundverse, or what do you have a name for it, or?
No, we haven't.
We don't.
We don't even. We just called it the city.
Yeah.
I kind of like that generic. Yeah.
I don't think we could even think of one. Like.
Yeah, I guess bound universe.
The bound universe. Yeah, I don't know.
There's definitely going to be a continuation now.
Yeah.
Because Therese, you're saying that you have stories you want to tell in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
What's your plans after? Do you have plans on doing having other protagonists in this, or do you plan on opening up as some questions that I've asked previous people I've interviewed is, would you make this into a shared universe, like make this kind of like a public domain, where in the way of saying, hey, whoever wants to tell a story in this part can hear this? Is that something that the two of you ever thought about?
I've never considered that. I'm too much of a control freak.
Yeah, I think at this point it's too close to our hearts for us to really want to invite
maybe
anyone
in like
else
20 years or so.
We do have some plans for what will come after, Bound. Enough plans. We've been calling it Bound Series 1. Mm-hmm. I think, like Matt said, it's a piece. It's going to have it's a completed piece. It's not going to be perpetual. This story is going to end, but there's more of the world that we have. There's other stories that we want to tell. But yeah, I think Natalia's story is gonna have a conclusion though. Might not be the last time you ever see her, but I don't think you'll see her starring in anything again.
Yeah, we have some surprises, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, the next, which we only recently realized was
a thing,
was going to happen, that we started to envision it as kind of a trilogy, but originally I was determined just to make 12 issues and just be like, this is going to be it. Whatever happens in these 12 issues happens, and there's no going back and like rewriting history or restarting it. Like, you can read this book and be done with it, or you can. Yeah, I think now we're okay with it continuing on.
I started
with a different point of view.
Just practicing writing in the world of Bound. So I'm like, I'm just going to make, I have an idea. I'm going to try it out, but it's just over here. It doesn't actually like matter. It's just so I get the practice in. And then I finally I've been playing with it for years, but finally was like, okay, I'm just going to type up a rough outline that was like 6 pages long, I think, by the time I finished it. And I was like, let me know what you think. We might be able to use some of that. And they were like, that could actually be the next project. So
we do see one of the projects being just like a 12-issue series of Natalia buying green beans. Then that's
yeah, exactly. We're gonna get to learn her recipe. It's been handed down generation after generation. No, actually, thus far there are no green beans in even that 6-page outline.
Teresa's been really great with taking this kind of world that I initially just imagined just me, and she's taking it and made it her own, and worked within the limitations of this story that I initially set up. And that
I think he's spent a lot of time seeing the world Natalia sees, and I've spent a lot of the time looking around her and seeing some of the parts of the city that she maybe hasn't encountered yet.
It's kind of in the same way that I don't want to like leave Kevin Lill out of it, that I took what he and I kind of brainstormed on and went back and forth with over the years and reshaped it a bit to fit what was in my head. And then that same token, Teresa's taken that and taken it even further. And I really like what she's come up with, and definitely can't wait to show people and start showing some of that stuff. Because we really have, like you said, that one of you guys said that the first issue is kind of simple. And,
I think I said that.
I like this simplicity of a movie that people might remember called The Terminator. I liked it was just so straightforward. There was no filler in that movie at all, and I don't feel like you could cut any of it out and still, like, it's just the pacing. I know everyone remembers Terminator 2, and I love Terminator 2, but James Cameron nailed the Terminator. Like, it was just like slam dunk on his first movie, like his first, like, his own movie that he and Galen Hurd created. And I love the pacing and the simplicity of it. And it wasn't just overcomplicated with like multiple storylines and multiple characters. And it was just these two characters running away from a killer robot. And yeah, I love that. That really appealed to me. And Teresa's taken that basic story that we created early on, and she's expanded it far beyond anything I could have done.
So good. So that's been an hour. So this went by pretty fast.
Wow.
So tell all the listeners and the viewers where they can find and read more of your works.
If you go to hexapus-ink.com, that's our website. I post regularly on Instagram at hexapus.ink. I'm trying to get in the habit of doing Twitter as well. I post not as frequently on Facebook, but I still pretty active on our Facebook page, which is bound.graphic novel on Facebook. Our Patreon is patreon.com/Hexapus Ink. And I post a lot of stuff, and I try to keep it regular. I don't try to go too long without posting something. If you do follow us and we haven't posted anything, it's probably a good chance that I'm just like deep into inking an issue.
Or they're in the wrong tier. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say definitely for those of the fans that really want to learn more about it, check out, go to hexapus/ink.com. That's hexapus-ink.com. And on there, you have a link right there to the Patreon page. So a lot of great images. You have your Patreon on there. You got your link to your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram account. So that's a good starting point for everybody. And I gotta say, I mean, the world that you've all created on there it's unique. It's engaging. And as I say, for those friends that love horror, friends that love sci-fi, definitely get a chance. Check out Bound. It's a great series. And thank you very much, Therese and Matt. And we'll look forward to talking, reading issue 4 as it comes out.
Yeah, thank you very much for having
Thanks
us.
so much for having us on.
Thank you.
All right. What kind of dog is it?
She is a Beagle Basset. I don't know if I can. I don't know. We had a rescue cat as well, and they just seem like more grateful. I think. I don't know. She's like the sweetest dog ever. I've had dogs that just would like tear stuff up and bite you and like get in all sorts. She won't even like pretend bite.
No. We drove cross country with her, and she stayed in hotels and everything, and she was just as good as one night, like 11 o'clock at night, never stayed in a hotel in her life. She was like, I have to go out and pee now. And she just went down the elevator, went outside, used the not by herself, I went with her, but but she was so good. Like she, like no accidents in hotels, even though there's lots of anxiety and stuff. She was just like, this is the best camping trip ever. Let's just keep doing it. And